It gives me great pleasure to be here at this 10th Raisina Dialogue and to moderate this esteemed panel discussion on secure waters, ASEAN, Quad and the Indo-Pacific. I would like to first thank the Observer Research Foundation, Dr. Samir Saran, and the Ministry of External Affairs for organising this very important discussion. This forum, of course, has consistently provided a vital space for engaging conversations on the pressing strategic challenges of our time, and today's discussion is no exception to that. To just set the scene, with the Indo-Pacific region standing at a critical crossroad with regional security, multilateralism, alliances and strategic partnerships being tested like never before. Geopolitical rivalry is continuing to shape this region's destiny, and the regional bodies that exist within it, like ASEAN and the Quad, are going to need to respond to these challenges that the region faces. One of which, of course, is the shifting foreign policy of the United States, which is recalibrating its approach to both global leadership and regional commitments, raising fundamental questions about its long-term strategic role in the Indo-Pacific region, coupled with China's increasing economic and strategic assertiveness in the region, such as its claim over the South China Sea, all raising further concerns about the future of the rules-based order. So with this context, ASEAN and the Quad countries face a defining challenge: how to navigate national interests while sustaining regionalism, multilateralism in an ever rapidly changing security environment. And in essence, the future of regional peace and stability and of a free and open Indo-Pacific region depends on how these groupings will evolve and engage with these shifting global dynamics. So to discuss this, we have an esteemed high-level panel who will delve into the pressing geopolitical, security and strategic factors that will shape ASEAN, the Quad and the broader Indo-Pacific region for years ahead, and who I will introduce shortly. But before we begin, let me briefly outline the structure of this session. After the expert panels shares their insights, we will open the floor for around 10 minutes for audience Q&A. So the speakers will provide their valuable perspectives, and you can take a note and a moment to think about the questions that you may wish to ask them then. So let me introduce our expert panel on these challenges facing ASEAN, the Quad and regional security. Firstly, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs from the Philippines, Mr. Enrique Manalo. Secondly, the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Thailand, Mr. Maurice Sangiapong. The Senior Research Fellow of Naval Warfare and Advanced Technology, Allison Center for National Security and at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., Mr. Brent Sadler. The Foreign and International Security Affairs Commentator, Nikkei, Japan, Mr. Hiroyuki Akita. The Assistant Professor, Department of Military History and Strategy, Republic of Korea Naval Academy in South Korea, Professor Ji Yeong-jung. And that is our panel. Welcome to our panellists. So let me just dive straight into this particular topic. And I'm going to ask this first question to our entire panel, and I'll start with our Secretary from the Philippines and come down from there. So firstly, the future of regional peace and stability and of a free and open Indo-Pacific depends on how groupings like ASEAN and the Quad evolve and engage to the shifting global dynamics in our region. With China's growing assertiveness and the US's evolving foreign policy position, do ASEAN and the Quad have a chance to succeed as groupings in tackling these challenges in our region? Or are we seeing strategic fragmentation rather than cohesion? Secretary, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good evening to all. Well, let me try and answer and respond to that question by first saying that definitely ASEAN and other regional organizations or groupings in our region definitely have a chance to succeed. The real challenge here is how to increase cooperation and partnerships among countries in the region. And as far as ASEAN is concerned, it has definitely moved along this direction. It's expanded its partnerships with many countries, dialogue partners, also development partners, and ASEAN has also increased its links with other regional organizations such as GCC, EU, etc. So definitely ASEAN has really maintained the road towards greater cooperation. So I don't really see how there could be any fragmentation, as ASEAN is determined to enhance its role in our region and also enhance its ASEAN centrality. Of course, we're faced with many challenges in the region, and these, I think, ASEAN and the individual members of ASEAN are concerned. You mentioned the growing assertiveness of China, which is definitely a fact. The Philippines has, in fact, borne the brunt of that assertiveness in the sense that China has actually prevented the Philippines from asserting its legal rights in accordance with UNCLOS, in accordance with the arbitral ruling of 2016. And our efforts to just exercise our rights by letting fishermen fish where they want to fish within our EEZ, or even supplying ships which are clearly within our EEZ are being challenged by China, which is laying claims to parts of the South China Sea which are clearly within our EEZ and therefore go against UNCLOS in the arbitral award. So this is a challenge by the Philippines, and I think ASEAN also is aware of that. Regarding the importance of a rules-based order is something which ASEAN firmly subscribes to, the need for all of us to abide by international law and a rules-based order, simply because middle powers and the smaller powers need international law and a rules-based order to protect their rights and enable them to thrive. And it's also important that middle powers and the other countries, smaller powers, have a role and say in their future. And that's, I think, what ASEAN is trying to do. We should determine our own future and not let the future of our region be determined, for example, by just the big powers. So that's somewhere where ASEAN is also focusing on. And again, one final point is the importance of multilateral cooperation. This can take the form of cooperation, for example, bilateral cooperation, multilateral cooperation, trilateral cooperation, between individual countries of ASEAN and then ASEAN, as I mentioned, with other regions such as GCC and the EU. So I think, just to go back to your question, yes, ASEAN has many challenges, but I believe that ASEAN is determined, as well as the individual countries, to succeed and not to allow the geopolitical uncertainties prevent our ability to prepare our people and for prosperity in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Sangyapong, as a fellow ASEAN member, how do you see this particular question in terms of the future of ASEAN and groupings?
Well, I'm not sure. First of all, thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. I'm not sure whether I would say that this is the easy or difficult questions because my colleagues already answered everything on behalf of the ASEAN. But I will add on from the Secretary Manalo mentioned, I think the ASEAN has a very special characters. I say in several occasions that ASEAN, in fact, we've gone through all of these things together during the hard time of Cold War periods, which is 50-something years ago, 58 years ago. In that period of time, it's the rivalries, not between country, but between the political ideologies. And we've gone through that difficult times together. And Philippines and Thailand is a founding member of ASEAN at that time. I fully agree with Secretary Manalo that ASEAN still very strong together. With 58 years of our development of ASEAN make us strong. And I think it is time for ASEAN to play a very active role in the areas of trying to balance the power between superpower. I think the collaborations between ASEAN is very important. And, you know, the integrations of ASEAN is also very, very important for, you know, to maintain peace and stabilities in the regions. The principle of strategic equilibrium, balancings of economic securities and diplomatic priority while upholding ASEAN roles as a center platform of the region dialogue is very important. On everything, ASEAN have gone through collaboration through a constructive dialogue. I still believe that the constructive dialogues will be the best way to solve all the problems of the rivalries of any major powers in the regions and in the world. I think that ASEANs are now playing very important role. As Secretary Manalo said, that we are ready to be part of the negotiations and try to be a model of collaborations and enhance these collaborations to extend it to several countries in the regions and in the world. If I can recall the comments made by our former permanent secretary of Singapore, he said that look at ASEAN. His name is Mr. Kishore. And then he said that if you want to learn how to live peacefully together, come to ASEAN and looking to ASEAN as the model of, you know, doing things peacefully together. After we established ASEAN 58 years ago, there's no major conflict in these regions. And that is the very special characters that ASEAN would like to offer, that we can work together. ASEAN has a number of dialogue partners, India is included, and that is the key characters of ASEAN, that we can work with other countries in the world. We also are a bridge builder, and we also link between several regional groupings, like Secretary Manalo said, BRICS, even Raisina, several regional groupings and regional and international forums. ASEAN will be playing very active role together with our country, other countries, to make sure that we live in the peaceful environment and to promote a constructive dialogue and rule-based of the United Nations.
Thank you, Minister. Brent Sadler.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm very optimistic about ASEAN and even more optimistic about the Quad, because for the Quad, this is the one with India, the US, Japan, and Australia. There's another Quad that I'm also very optimistic about, which is in the South Pacific, but perhaps for another time. And the reason I'm optimistic is that for ASEAN, embracing what ASEAN is, it's not to judge it by the outcomes that it delivers, the Secretariat based in Jakarta and the group of nations, all 10 of them, because they're a mosaic. They're not a monolithic, coherent group of singular national interest. It's fragmented, it's a mosaic. So really the right metric, and the one that I've tried very hard to impress upon policymakers in DC for many years, is to judge ASEAN's effectiveness going forward based on what it enables. And I'll give you one example. Back about 2012-13, the US was rebalancing to the Asia Pacific, and central to this was Southeast Asia in particular. And the notion of small like-minded groupings of nations coming together was encouraged by the ASEAN Secretariat. One of the tangible, very real outcomes was the trilateral cooperative agreement which was mentioned already, which was between the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And it was to police the Sulu Sea against piracy and terrorist activities of Abu Sayyaf. And of course, that enabled other things. And so for that, I give high marks for ASEAN, because it's enabling other very tangible actions, some of which, as Burma goes through a very troubling time right now internally, and also, of course, the plight to the Rohingya, it is going to very likely enable, not in ASEAN proper, but its members to take real actions, because they can come together They can socialize and then find the most optimum path forward. It also, importantly, as an American up here on the stage, it enables also partnering with other nations outside of ASEAN in a very, I guess, constructive manner. Less, I think, one of the original intents of ASEAN was to give leverage and strength to all 10 nations acting together. I think ASEAN's strength is as a platform to enable these smaller groupings to actually do real things, which they have. And the Quad, of course, has taken off new meaning in the threats and, I guess, the return of great power competition, most notably driven by a rising China's presence in Southeast Asia, but also across the globe. Interests of China don't align with many of its neighbors and other countries in the world, and that friction is drawing other countries to come together, again, because the threat of conflict is becoming much more real as we see in Ukraine today.
Thank you. Hiroyuki Ikata.
Hi, thank you very much. First of all, this face doesn't look like, it's completely different from the photo on the agenda profile. But please don't worry, this is not a deep fake, but I'm a genuine Hiro Akita. Just don't wear glass. So since I'm from one of the most dangerous geopolitical location, Japan. Japan is surrounded by big and rich dragon, and also huge bear, and also there is a very unpredictable country in the Korean Peninsula. So maybe I'd like to present a more pessimistic view about the geostrategic landscape of Indo-Pacific. If I compare this region to a weather map, it looks like this for me. There are three levels of destabilizing factors or threats. First level, lower level, is a tornado. Tornado can hit you once, but then it disappears. Maybe from Japanese perspective, it is North Korea. Sorry about that. But then it can hit once, but cannot hit many times. And second level of the destabilizing factor is big hurricane. Hurricane will hit you maybe several times, and it will cause huge impact in a bigger region, but it cannot last forever. It will hit a peak and fade away. Maybe that is Russia that is waging a war in Ukraine. So Russia waging a war in Ukraine is hurricane. And then highest level of the destabilizing factor is a climate change. Climate change caused by China. China is causing climate change of ecosystem of security and geo-economic relation in this region. And this will not hit us today or tomorrow, but it constantly changes the geopolitical, geostrategic landscape to be more favorable to China by using economic cooperation or sometimes military intimidation. But that is not the end of the story. And now we have another climate change coming from Trump administration. And this is very, very unpredictable climate change. So Trump administration is trying to transform the ecosystem or international and regional system to be more from rule-based or value-based to power-based or transactional-based. And big question is, last point is, big question is that for the Trump administration's climate change will be good news for this region or bad news for this region. And I was in Washington, D.C. last month, trying to find the answer, but I'm not sure at all. So I would say there are two extreme scenarios. Good scenario and best scenario and worst scenario. So best scenario is that Trump administration will bring more military asset to this region, maybe by reducing a footprint in Europe, and then try to push back the climate change caused by China, and thereby maintain the US kind of influence in this region. But one scenario is that Trump administration will cut a deal with China on a trade and economy, potentially at the expense of security, And then instead of bringing more military asset to this region, but choose to coexist with China's sphere of influence. In that case, ASEAN country, Japan, everybody will be gradually surrounded by China's climate change, and it may change the way of life. So that is my pessimistic, but I hope realistic perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Akita. It's given climate change a whole new meaning. Professor Xi.
Chair, and thank you very much for having me here with the distinguished guest. I'd like to add a few comments along with Akita-san, that he mentioned that Japan is placed in the most dangerous place in the world, but I'd like to add South Korea too. Following what has been already delivered by the co-panelists, I'd like to add a few things for the discussion later. And actually, there has been a common understanding or the shared assumptions in the Indo-Pacific, and now the assumptions are changing. There were three assumptions. One is that we are living with the Indo-Pacific framework. Second one is that most of countries are connected by or through the seas. So anything that concerns to the maritime affairs or maritime security affairs are gaining the growing importance, and it's going to be more important in the future. The last shared understanding among the Indo-Pacific players were the U.S.-China relations, or the U.S.-Russia relations has been a fixed, constant factor in a country's diplomatic calculations. But previous two factors may be sustained, but the last factor is changing, and that gives a lot of concerns for a lot of countries thinking about their diplomatic costs to afford or the other economic costs they need to review. So that said, that many changing effects or dynamics evolved from the U.S.-China relations and the U.S.-Russian relations actually makes a lot of Indo-Pacific players to think about the return of the hedging strategy or return of the strategic independence or strategic autonomy, so that they can maximize their national interest, not spoiling or not ruining any kind of the previous cooperation and previous platforms of the dialogues. So probably the ASEAN or the Quad are the preferable option for many countries to join to talk about the changing dynamics in the international relations. But also some other multilateral platforms may be emerged in discussion of the changing international relations. So I will leave it here, and then I look forward to receiving your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, President Xi. I mean, I think we had some fairly varied answers to a fairly broad question about the future of ASEAN and the Quad and the region we live in vis-a-vis China's assertiveness and the changing, evolving foreign policy position of the United States. I want to now go more specific to some of our panellists on particularly the countries they live in, the region they're a part of, and thus ask firstly to Secretary Manalo about the Philippines. The Philippines, of course, has been grappling with ongoing tensions in the South China Sea while strengthening security ties with the United States under President Marcos. At the same time, ASEAN remains committed to diplomatic solutions and regional autonomy. So how does Manila navigate this balance, deepening its alliances with the United States while reinforcing ASEAN's centrality and managing tensions with China?
Thank you. Actually, we're doing all of them. And first, on the issue of the South China Sea tensions, as you mentioned, I think I already spoke earlier on that. We obviously are faced with challenges because of China's growing assertiveness and its excessive maritime claims, which certainly go beyond international law, or the UNCLOS. And we are determined to, of course, assert our rights, but at the same time, we're committed to, as much as possible, resolving whatever tensions we have or disputes through diplomatic or peaceful means. And we have lines of communication with China, but nevertheless, we have made it perfectly clear that any talks we have will not be at the expense of our position, and that is asserting our rights in accordance with the, for example, in our case, the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, as well as the Arbitral Award. We have, of course, established a number of growing defense and economic cooperation with partners in the region, of course, with the United States, which remains our only treaty ally. But we have also enhanced our defense and economic cooperation with countries in the region, for example, with Japan, with Australia, with New Zealand, even with Republic of Korea. And these are only countries in the region. We've also strengthened our ties with Canada and also with the EU and individual EU countries in an effort to ensure not only our security, defense security, but also our economic security and economic resilience, which eventually redound to enhancing your own national security. So we are exploring all of these partnerships with like-minded countries, and there are quite a lot of them, and including with India today. We are already discussing elevating our relationship to much higher level. And because we share similar outlooks, not only for a free and open Indo-Pacific, but a free and stable and growing prosperity and commitment to democratic values. So in a way, that's how we're navigating it, because at the same time, while we have economic relations with China, we're also, as I mentioned, have lines of communication with China to try and address the tensions. Of course, it's not always easy in our discussions, as many of my country partners here know. These are negotiations and talks, so they take time. But the point is, it's important we're talking. But nevertheless, we can't rely simply on one line to pursue. So we're pursuing these partnerships as well as various types of cooperation. I mentioned earlier unilateral cooperation, even trilateral cooperation with other countries. So we are trying to really shore up our cooperation with like-minded partners, but at the same time addressing one of our primary security concerns in the South China Sea.
Thank you, Secretary. Minister Sangiapong, I wanted to ask you how should the rest of the world see ASEAN's approach to China? I mean, on the one hand, obviously, ASEAN centrality continues to be supported and recognised, but on the other hand, there are individual ASEAN countries' national interests. Thailand, including, for example, its national interests, such as its trading with Russia for economic growth. Obviously, that led to sanctions from the United States as well on many Thai firms. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of that sort of landscape, the national interest balance vis-a-vis ASEAN and ASEAN centrality, how do countries like Thailand and others in ASEAN sort of reconcile their national interests with that imperative for cohesive multilateral cooperation within ASEAN? And indeed, how do we see that approach in terms of ASEAN's approach to China?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to highlight that like Philippines, Thailand has a very long standings and long histories of close relationship with US. We have a very special relationship. Our relationship date back, and it's almost 200 years ago. It's based on the treaties of, collaborations. And right now, during in the midst of the changings of the whole geopolitics, which is very fast, we are now trying to set up, working together, take stock of what we have together with the US. And we would like to set up the strategic plan, how we can, work closely with US in several dimensions. And at the same time, Thailand is very close to China. We have also a very special relationship, not just a trading partner, but we also sharing the same value of culture, histories, and also we are part, we move from China, and then we have a very special relation with China. So take the example of a very good relationship between Thailand and US and between Thailand and China. Now we move closely together with ASEAN, which share the same value of collaborations to not to protect, but to highlight the interests of our regional groupings as the whole. So take advantage of being a special relationship with several countries, including, as Secretary Manalo mentions, that Thailand and ASEAN has long histories of relationship with several regional groupings and has a very long relationship between other countries in the whole world. ASEAN has several countries who are part of the dialogue with ASEAN. We have like US, EU, Australia, New Zealand, India, and Japan, Korea. Not only that, some of the ASEAN countries also working very closely in the sub-region groupings like Mekong sub-regions. And Mekong sub-regions comprise of countries in CLMV. This is part of ASEAN. And all this kind of good relationship with all the country, with all the regional grouping, we can, balance. And as I said from the very beginnings, that the dialogue, constructive dialogues, are very important. And to highlight a good collaboration, what I like to see is that we can think of something in common interest and trying to create the common interest as the sector or the issues that we can work peacefully together, that we can work for the benefits of the country, for the benefits of the regions, and for the benefits of the mankind. I think there's no ways or not a single actions that we can get rid of the difficulties that we have in this real world. But we have to start good collaborations, change all the mindsets of the conflict into collaborations is the best way. And I believe that constructive dialogue to promote a stronger collaborations will lead to a durable solutions at the end.
Thank you, Minister. Brent Sadler, history has shown that when one power steps back, others are quick to step in. With the rise of US isolationism, the dismantling of USAID and foreign funding freeze, and with the US withdrawal from certain multilateral groupings, what does this mean for the US's strategic commitment and engagement in this region, particularly in relation to ASEAN and the Quad? And how can such foreign policy postures be beneficial for a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region?
Well, I would push back on the characterization of US moving to an isolationist posture. Quite to the contrary, I would say it's one of answering and pursuing America's interests in a very clear and explicit articulation, which makes it a lot easier for other nations to adjust, but also to engage the United States in meaningful action. And because of the tensions and the threat of major war breaking out, most notably between the United States and China over the fate of Taiwan, I think it's in all our interest, and it's the top of the current administration's priorities, is to make sure that a war doesn't break out with China, because that would be extremely destructive for all of our nations in this room and many that aren't here. And so that is the number one interest of the United States. It's certainly the interest of the current administration. And I think if you look to Bridge Colby, who's soon to be the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, he's articulated this time and time again. So if people are policy, it's pretty clear that's the direction we're going. The USAID, I think, is actually welcomed by many, specifically African countries, the programs that were not of the asking of the host country, that the United States is taking it back and reassessing how it engages more effectively, but also with limited resources where our priorities are most important. So I'd push back on the characterization that the USAID is part of a wider isolationist bent. But again, the United States has mutual treaty obligations for defense that are also mutually entered into. It's not the United States imposing that go back decades, but have in the last few years, under China's actions, become reinvigorated. That's with the Philippines, it's with South Korea, and of course with Japan. And those are all frontline countries in China's first island chain. And so it's imperative for the United States that force is easy to assess and to measure and to see. So military presence is perhaps the most effective language of diplomacy. And quite frankly, the Chinese are watching that. And so I think that is something you're going to see as an engagement, not an isolation, that is founded on, first and foremost, Americans' national interest, and quite frankly, a national interest that's shared by many countries in the region.
Thank you. Mr. Akita. Following Japan's Prime Minister Ishiba's recent visit to the United States to visit President Trump, who pledged 100% deterrent support for Japan against what he called China's economic aggression, you have written about the deepening Japan-US alignment in countering Beijing's influence. So, however, given Trump's sort of transactional approach to foreign policy, one could say, how confident now is Japan that this commitment will be sustained? What concrete steps would Tokyo like to see from Washington to solidify the security assurance for Japan and for the region we live in?
So short answer is maybe as of today, they are relieved, and maybe in a way they are assured by the Ishiba's visit without catastrophe. But if you ask me about 1 year or 2 years or 4 years from now, we are not sure. We means I'm not at least sure, because it's deeply related to the power structure of Trump administration. So initially, I and also many people assume that power structure of Trump administration is a condominium of different factions. Maybe let's say 4 factions. One, the other, here is the MAGA people, Make America Great Again, represented by maybe Vice President Vance. And on the other side of the spectrum, there are people like Secretary of State, Mr. Rubio, or National Security Advisor Waltz. So some people define them as a China hawk or primacist. Anyway, the other side, end of the spectrum, MAGA. And in between, there are people like Elbridge Colby. And then here is Musk. So if these 4 factions compete each other, maybe we will see more predictability. And the expectation in Japan or other US allies, or maybe in India, will be that maybe those people like Rubio or Waltz, primacist or China hawk, will make much of, insist that alliance is so important, and then try to kind of prevent US Trump administration's policy to drift away from alliances. But I think now, power structure is not that, doesn't look like that at all. Power structure now look like a solar system. Solar system instead of condominium factions. What I mean is that there aren't any strong factions that can influence Mr. Trump, but they are just a coalition, loose coalition of these people, and it's almost like a universe. And then under solar system of Trump empire, their sun, that is Mr. Trump, and all the universe are going around the sun. And it is the sun who make a final decision. It is nothing like a competition so much. And maybe Mr. Trump will pick up advices, options that he thinks it is best from his perspective. And if he thinks that this universe, cabinet members or advisors, will not be important anymore, maybe he will turn off the switch of the gravity and this planet will go out of orbit. Sorry for my journalistic expression, but that is if that is the case, we have to analyze what the sun do. It's more difficult than analyzing this in battle of these factions, how it plays in. So because of this new interpretation of the power structure of Trump administration, I know that the Prime Minister Modi have a very good visit to Washington, and Ishiba's visit to Washington was okay, but I'm not so sure that any single success of state visit will assure the very, very stable relation in years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Ji, and the last question about to go to the audience. Professor, the US and South Korea have been strategic allies for decades, with the 1953 Mutual Defence Treaty forming the backbone of their security relationship. But with the Trump administration signalling shifts in US foreign policy, there's a lot of uncertainty about what it means for long-standing alliances. So where does this leave countries like South Korea? Or more importantly, what role do you see South Korea playing when it comes to securing the seas within the Indo-Pacific?
Thank you for the question, and probably this question is something I'd like to ask to the other experts as well, because U.S. and South Korea has a long history to be in the alliance system, and South Korea has been one of the crucial partner to the U.S. And some changes made from the D.C. is making South Korean policymakers and professionals to review their policies. But given the circumstances and given the experience South Korea underwent, then there is a consolidation of the U.S. alliance system, and South Korea is placed well within the alliance system. So probably despite of the changing environment or despite of the changing power in the DC, but still, I guess that the two countries' relationship is solidified and strengthened.
Thank you, Professor. Look, I have so many more questions I would love to ask this panel, but we are limited to time and also to dinner. So this is your opportunity to ask the panel a question. Please introduce yourself by stating your name and organisational affiliation, and kindly ask that you keep your questions brief and focused, and please refrain from making statements or comments. So where do I go first?
Hello, can I speak? My name is Daisuke Kawai from Tokyo, Japan, an assistant professor at the University of Tokyo. I also serve as a senior advisor to the Core Investors Network. So my question is about the institutionalization of a Quad. One of the challenges that I think is the Quad has launched numerous initiatives that are making it difficult for non-experts to keep tracking of them. So this leads to misunderstandings among ASEAN member states and causing ASEAN member states with to view Quad with cautious. So in that sense, I believe we need a more effective public outreach strategy to better engage with the ASEAN states, such as a unified.
To your question? Can you get to the question?
So my question is that if such institutionalization were to take place, how would the ASEAN countries perceive it? Could the establishment of a permanent office or secretariat be considered? Thank you.
Who on our panel would like to answer that? Brent.
Yeah, so the Quad has its beginnings in a naval exercise that goes back, to the 90s called Operation Malabar. And so it was founded with a security, a maritime, a naval at the part, because that was easy. And there was easy for common interest to align in that regard. So fast forward to today, common interest between the four countries, I think India is the most important one in coming to this new reality and pressure from Beijing that's not all positive and increasingly a threat. And so this common threat perception is driving the Quad together. So formalization, making institutions about it to enable more actions that deter bad activities or actions from competitors or other countries outside of the Quad, contrary to those interests, are going to happen organically and is already happening. I'm not sure that it's necessary to have an outreach or a public communications campaign to try to explain the Quad to ASEAN. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there are countries within ASEAN that do welcome more security assurances from a broader array of partners. The Quad is one way. India's Act East kind of policy comes to mind, which has a history of more than 10 years. Now inside the construct of a Quad, it's welcomed by numerous countries inside ASEAN. So I don't think there's much explaining if the actions and the delivery of a public good is understood and appreciated by specific countries. It's not going to be everything to everybody, but alliances and partnerships and multilateral organizations hardly ever are.
Hello. Okay, on your left, please. Can I take the second question? Yeah. My question is on the military-industrial complex in the Indo-Pacific. So on one side, we are seeing increasing militarization in the Indo-Pacific. On the other side, there's a transatlantic rift, and Europe is going to diversify its military supply chains. So they want to supply to the Indo-Pacific. So are we going to witness a competition or coordination between US and Europe or the European powers in the Indo-Pacific on militarization? Thank you.
Who in our panel would like to answer that question on militarization? Professor Xi?
I guess that there are a lot of industrial cooperation and government-to-government cooperation building the kind of ecosystem on the defense industry as well as the other things and so on. So, for example, the shipbuilding industry is the emerging item for making the old countries getting together, because shipbuilding sounds like a simple, but it's not a simple things to approach, and a lot of countries need to build up the multilateral platform for developing the shipbuilding technologies and the production and maintenance as well. So on one side, that US and Europe may be in competition to approach to the Indo-Pacific players for the shipbuilding industry, for example. On the other side, US and Europe and the other, even the US allies and ASEAN countries are all together to build ships commercially or the militarily. So on one side, we can see the competition. On the other side, we can see the cooperation. Thank you.
The lady at the back.
Hello. Thank you. How critical do you see, Vandanik Merrick's Germany. How critical do you see the rising tensions between China and Taiwan, and how are ASEAN US allies coordinating with Taiwan on the security threat in the region? Thank you.
Thank you. Who in our panel would like to take that question regarding China and Taiwan? Yes, Secretary.
Well, of course, the issue of Taiwan is of great concern to all the countries in our region, if not to the world. And I think that, for example, from the perspective of the Philippines, our northernmost island is only 70 kilometers away from the southern tip of Taiwan, and we have over 150,000 Filipinos living and working in Taiwan. So the point here is our position, basically, and I'm sure this is probably shared by many countries, is that our hope is that whatever resolution, whatever outcome of the situation in Taiwan it has to be done through peaceful means. And I think we have made that message very clear, and we have urged the parties concerned to maintain regular lines of communication in order to prevent tensions escalating. Tensions are always simmering. Sometimes they get higher, sometimes lower, but the important thing is to ensure that the tensions do not erupt into something even more dangerous. And believe me, a conflict in Taiwan involving some of the major powers will have fantastic ramifications not only on our region, but even globally. And I think it's really in our interest to try and ensure that the tensions do not escalate.
Thank you. We have time for one last question.
Ma'am, you're on the left side.
And yes.
As we heard about the evolving role of Quad and ASEAN, the shifting US dynamics and the growing economic and security challenges, given these complexities, how can these regional groups continue to play a strong role in maintaining the stability and cooperation?
It's a bit like your opening question. I think anyone can take this.
Well, I think
Secretary.
ASEAN has a very key role in the sense that by enhancing the ASEAN centrality in the region. I think the ASEAN is probably the only organization or regional grouping which has the necessary infrastructure, institutional mechanisms to bring about the participation of all the big and middle and small powers in the region and also those outside the region. We have two key mechanisms, the East Asia Summit and the ASEAN Regional Forum, which every year bring together all the key players who have interest in the Indo-Pacific. And this doesn't just include those in our region, but also the EU, United States, Canada, and other countries. So ASEAN has, I think, a very important role in bringing together the various countries in the region, bringing them together to discuss issues of not only regional concern, but also of global concern. And these can range from climate change to the security situation, for example, in our region. And ASEAN is also reaching out to other regions from Latin America, etc. So ASEAN is really trying to serve as a kind of bridge builder to bring together various regions, at least provide a forum for discussing issues and hopefully through those discussions finding solutions.
Well, thank you, Secretary, and thank you to those questions. And on that slightly positive note, facing all of the issues for ASEAN and the Quad in the region we live in, I want to thank our panellists. Please join me in thanking our expert panellists on this session today.